Does anyone have any questions? And anything that's come up for you since we were talking an hour and a half ago? No? Okay. Yes?
How to use mindfulness in such a competitive society, during such as your work, job, daily life?
I'm having a little trouble hearing you.
How to use mindfulness in the competition of the society.
How to use mindfulness in the conditions of
competition.
In a competition.
Daily life.
Of conditions and competition both of daily life, I think. But your mindfulness is primarily it's primarily mindfulness of yourself and what is happening with you. But it's not exclusively that. You're also observing others. And so and you're seeing yourself in others and seeing others in yourself if you're practicing mindfulness. So the form that practicing mindfulness in your life takes, and this is very well described in the Satipatthana Sutra, the 4 applications of mindfulness, as it's called, where you're observing what's happening with your body moment by moment, both what you're doing and what you're experiencing through the senses. And then, and that's the first application of mindfulness, is mindfulness of the body. And then the second is mindfulness of the feelings, which means not sensations and emotions, but it means pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Because every thought and every sensory experience is associated with one of these 3 feelings. It's either pleasant, unpleasant, or it's neutral. And you'll see, of course, that the experiences of the body in particular are associated with those feelings. But every sensory experience has downstream to it some kind of mental experience that arises in association with it. You see something, you recognize it, you have associations. And the seeing in itself may be neutral, but the associations may be pleasant or unpleasant. And every sensory experience has this downstream mental quality of pleasant or unpleasant. So in applying mindfulness in your life, first to your body, then to your feelings, and then you notice beyond that is that there is always some mental state or another. And this mental state is not constant, although it's relatively constant compared to the transiency of actions and sensations and feelings. It's longer lasting than that. But mental state is constantly shifting. We're shifting through states of desire, of confusion, of aversion, of joy, of unhappiness, of mental clarity. There's a lot of what we call emotions as really mental states. And we see that those are related to, in a two-way manner with our feelings. So that bodily experiences cause certain feelings to arise, and those feelings in turn condition our minds so that we have certain mental states. And then the mental states that we're in turn, condition the kinds of things we experience and the kinds of reactions of pleasantness or unpleasant that arise in association with that. And so the mental states is the third application of mindfulness. And the fourth is the mindfulness of the reality that you're experiencing moment by moment, and I believe you know the word for that is Dhamma or Dharma, and that the moment-to-moment mental reality that you experience is something that's actually generated by your mind as a part of this composite whole of bodily experience, feelings, and mental states. And it both conditions them and is conditioned by them. So practicing mindfulness in your daily life is really what this sutra, the 4 applications of mindfulness, is about. It's about practicing this awareness of what am I doing and why am I doing it, and what are the motivations that drive it and the mental states that create it. What is this reality that I'm experiencing, and how is this reality conditioned by my mind? And so that's the practice of mindfulness. Now the interesting thing about this sutra, it repeats over and over again. Counted it once. I think it was 22 times, but it's almost every single description of an application of mindfulness is followed by the statement that he sees this in him internally and externally, and both internally and externally. And this is that other part of it, that you see these things in yourself, but then in the practice of mindfulness you can't help but see them in others as well. And seeing them both internally and externally has this advantage that what you see, when you see the same thing in another, you can sometimes see it with a degree of clarity that you can't see when you're looking at yourself. You know that? Right. And so when you see it in someone else and then you bring that understanding back, then you understand yourself better. You see more clearly what's happening in you. And the other way around too, that becoming familiar with the process that you are based on this, and then you see what other people are doing, comes this understanding. You see yourself in them. You see that they are just another manifestation of exactly the same processes that you have come to see and understand yourself. And so by, as I say, the Buddha in the sutra over and over again says, you see it internally and you see it externally, and you see it both internally and externally. And so in your daily life, when you practice mindful awareness, you're applying it to yourself, and then you're applying the same understanding, enhancing the same understanding as well as applying it to other people. So it doesn't, in all of the different conditions of daily life, including competition. I'm not sure if I heard you correctly, if that was one of the words you used or not. Was it competition? Or yeah, it was. Okay. So that's just one of the conditions. But in all of our sorts of interactions with other people, people do things that offend us in one way or another, or we struggle with each other, we compete, or I'm right, you're wrong, all of these different things. But as understanding grows through mindfulness, we are seeing that the same processes are taking place in all of us, and we see that they have the same roots. And so that's how you practice mindfulness in daily life. You have a lapse in mindfulness anytime that you forget to observe with clarity and your mind attaches to the perceived reality as being something that it's absolutely the way it is. That this person I'm interacting with is a bad person. Then you've lost mindfulness when you have that kind of perception. When you become trapped in it. But whereas when you are practicing mindfulness, you see that whatever the person is doing, whether it by various standards is judged good or bad, wholesome or unwholesome, but when you can recognize in it that it is a manifestation of exactly those same processes that constitute you, and that in fact constitute each of us as a sentient being functioning in the world, then that's mindfulness. Is that answering your question? Or did I miss the mark?
He's asking, Joseph, he's asking about a competitive society.
A competitive
about practicing mindfulness in such a competitive society.
So it wasn't so much about competition, it was about competitiveness.
Competitiveness.
Right.
Well, certainly in this, in our society, you see, competitiveness is not inherently a good or a bad thing. it just is what it is. Competitiveness is basically a striving on the basis of comparison, and which can lead to good things, and does lead to good things, but it also can lead to bad things. In a competitive society, which this is the problem in our society, is that a lot of our competitiveness is rooted in just outright greed, desire, or aversion, hatred, fear. That's the problem. It's not the competitiveness itself. To function in a competitive society, you may find yourself in many situations where you are fulfilling the role of a competitor. And that's fine. That's not inherently a problem. But where mindfulness is extremely important is that you function in the role of a competitor in a wholesome way, and that you not be drawn into competition that's of the sort that is rooted in just desire and aversion in these unwholesome roots, and that you're able to turn away from that. I know the kind of practical problems that everyone encounters is that, for example, you're competing with someone, and the arena of your competition is one that you or your family depend upon for your livelihood. And there's many other examples that we could point to, but this is probably the most common one, that you hold a particular position in an organization, and somebody comes along and they want to take that away from you. And then how do you deal with that? Especially if, driven by their desire, they're quite willing to engage in unscrupulous activities in order to achieve their goal. And how do you deal with that situation? And that is a tremendous challenge. Now, as a person who has some degree of wisdom and understanding, then two things. One, the primary thing is you have to recognize that whatever the arena of the competition, it's not worth sacrificing your own integrity. And that's you have to. That's the recognition that as much value as we may place on something, and as willing as we may be to exert effort and energy in this arena of competition, that that we really need to maintain certain moral and ethical standards for ourselves that are based in the degree of understanding that we have, and that the potential loss of some sort is not worth and does not justify sacrificing those standards, and to try to live up to that. And I'll follow that with the warning that if you fail, it doesn't matter, but you try to do better next time. The idea is the process of perfecting yourself in this way, not demanding that you meet perfection, and if you succumb, you succumb. But as much as possible in a competitive situation, you want to maintain your morality, your ethics, your integrity, and you would like to be sufficiently free of attachment and sufficiently trusting of the, how could we put it, trusting of the laws of karma, that if you take the high road, that there may be a temporary defeat, but it will only lead to the opportunity for something better in the future. So that's the one side of it. The other side of the competition, of dealing with competitiveness, is as an opportunity for developing compassion, love, and understanding in yourself, of not falling into the trap of condemning in your mind and judging the person that you're competing with because perhaps the standards of by which they're competing are not the same as yours. Rather than condemnation and aversion and hatred, that try to come from a place of loving kindness, understanding, compassion. Compassion because for exactly the same reason that you want to maintain a wholesomeness in your approach to the situation, that the other person's failure to do so is going to bring consequences upon them which they don't foresee. Right? So there's a lot of room for compassion in that. Practicing skillful means. I mean, ideally, in that sort of difficult competitive situation, you would somehow have the skills and abilities that you might even bring to this person an understanding that would change their approach. Perhaps open the way to finding some other solution to the competition, some other resolution, or ultimately what it could mean. The ultimate in skillful means, which would require a high degree of non-attachment and a tremendous degree of compassion and understanding, would be to, at some point, recognizing that the only result of further struggle would be more harm done to either yourself or other people, would be to surrender whatever it is the object of the competition.
Do you find when somebody competes with you, like in this society or whatever society, do you find that like kind of a sign of fear from the other person to you?
Of course, yes, it is. It's a sign. It's coming from some mixture of desire and aversion, and part of aversion is fear. I mean, why do people strive for the things that they strive for? Why do they think they need them so badly? What is it they're afraid of? They're afraid of the possibility of their future suffering. They're afraid of poverty for themselves. They're afraid of not having what they need. And so it's very much coming from a place of fear on the part of that person, whether they recognize it or not. These compelling mental states that we label so simply as desire and aversion, and those are good labels. They're actually very functional. But as you look into them more deeply, you find that they expand into all of these various dimensions, and that all of these different kinds of emotions that compel people in their behaviors do actually quite neatly fall into one or the other of these categories. And fear is a part of aversion. And fear is, people don't realize it sometimes, that greed, they see the greed coming from the desire part, but don't recognize that the greed also comes from insecurity, which comes from fear, which comes from the aversion for some imagined potential suffering that they might experience in the future.
How destructive do you find ego in a person?
Well, when we say the word ego, not everyone is necessarily understanding exactly the same thing by it. But the problem is not ego per se. Ego can be unhealthy or it can be healthy. But the problem is the attachment to what we are calling the ego. And once again, it will come down to exactly the same things. So we say, okay, is because of that person's ego that they want this so badly and that they're willing to do anything that they can for it. But it is still a combination of pleasure-seeking and fear and aversion that is driving what we're calling the ego. The ego is this identification of ourselves as an entity separate from everything else. The ego is it's a word that was coined I guess a little over 100 years ago by Freud. If I'm not mistaken, I think Freud actually is the person who invented this word, because he needed some word to describe this thing that we're talking about, that this mind-created sense of I-ness, I, me, and mine, this identification by which we conceptually separate our self from everything else. And that is that the ego is sort of like a mental function, a mental process. And what makes up the ego is constantly changing. But that ego can be healthy or unhealthy. But when we attach to the ego as a real thing, when we, in our minds, make our sense of self to be really real in an ultimate sense, then we are compelled to compete. And we are compelled to, we make this distinction that the importance of I is such that the good and well-being of what is not I, what is other, can be sacrificed to meet the needs of I, of the ego. And so when we become attached to this idea of ego, it leads by natural logical progression to certain conclusions that anything that you can grasp onto and hold onto that will enhance this self is a good thing to do. And anything that you can do to protect or prevent harm or loss or suffering to this self it's completely logical. Once you firmly grasp onto this idea of self as an ultimate reality, you are logically condemned to have a mind that is going to be motivated through desire and aversion. There is no way out of it. It's the simple logic of the presumption of me as being separate. And that is a very fundamental underlying problem. But you see, the ego itself isn't the problem, it's the attachment. An awakened being still can distinguish their body and their mind, that their mind as a process and their body as a functional aggregation of elements in the world has certain unique needs, and it will decompose and dissolve if those needs aren't met. And an awakened being isn't a being that's incapable of taking care of themselves. They certainly can, and of recognizing what their needs are. But so in that sense, there is this mental function of ego, of being able to discern a purely mentally generated boundary in functional terms, and to take appropriate actions to respect the contents of that boundary. But that's quite different than the belief in an attachment and the essential being captivated by this sense of self, which will automatically lead to not only to these unwholesome states of desire and aversion, but it also leads inevitably to suffering. That when a mind that attaches to the idea of ego as an ultimate reality is going to dwell constantly in a state of dissatisfaction, threat, loss, either real or imagined. It's just that there is no other way. So the ego itself, just purely as a function of the mind, something the mind does, like perceiving a certain wavelength of light as red, that's a function of the brain and the mind. The ego as a function of mind that can discern that this body and this mind has its needs is not a bad thing. But the attachment to it and the misunderstanding, the ignorant belief that it's an ultimate reality is the problem. And that's the root of the competition, too. So we live in a competitive society. We have to, I think the best way to regard it is the competitive society gives us a profoundly effective opportunity to zero in on these truths and go beyond an intellectual understanding to them to a full realization of them and an awakening. But the problems of living in the world are not, one option is to try to withdraw from the world. But even that, you can succeed in many different ways. And of course, this was the advice of the Buddha to the bhikkhus, is to give up all of the things of the world and simplify your life as possible. But the point was not that by doing this, that you were going to, in this way, escape the fundamental issue. All it did is simplify the circumstances. And whereas on the one hand, simplifying the circumstances may make it easier to do the practice and to penetrate to the realization which is ultimately liberating, there is another side to this. And that is that living in the world, if you can keep from being overwhelmed, living in the world gives you an even more powerful opportunity to do the same thing. I had a conversation with a Tibetan monk, Geshe Dorje, a number of years ago about this, whether the idea of becoming a monastic and withdrawing from the world is better, or being a layperson working in the world. And his response is he felt that actually, if you can avoid being overwhelmed, the life of a layperson is actually a far more powerful vehicle than the life of a monastic for penetrating through these particular problems and challenges. So, it has its positive side. And unless you've already made the decision to become a monastic, then dwell on the positive side of the challenges of living in a world with its competitiveness, with its glorification of greed, with its glorification of hatred, with its glorification of self and individuality. It will bring you very strongly face to face with the ultimate problems that you have to deal with. And so, you can take it as a blessing if you have to. And I think those of you that have taken vows and taken rows have discovered as well, I think that simple act doesn't really remove you from these problems of the world. It gives you a tremendous buffer, but you still have to deal with them. There's no escape. So thank you for the two of you for those good questions. I'm going to direct us back to the process of meditation, and we're going to try to get more practice time in this afternoon. Now, a little bit of recapitulation, and then I'm going to introduce you to another meditation technique. So, as I pointed out to you, your mind is many different processes. It's not one thing. And although you call it your mind, that's mainly because you're stuck with it, not because you have control over it. When I say you, that's assuming that or that's just going along with the sense we have that somehow there is an I that's in control. I mean, ultimately, as you discover, there really isn't an I that's in control. There's just all these different processes taking place. Okay, so your mind is a collection of processes. What is it that you really have control over? You've already discovered you can't control the movement of your attention. or you have very limited control over. I mean, I didn't say that properly. Okay, that's wrong. You can control the movement of your attention, but this intentional self is limited in its control over the movement of your attention. You move your attention onto the sensations of the breath, but then something else causes it to move somewhere else. Right? As a matter of fact, what you do have, the only thing that you really have control over is you can generate an intention, and where your attention goes is part of that intention. And then everything else, you have to somehow get all these different mental processes on board to go along with that intention that you've generated. You can't do it by force of will. So what you're doing is you are directing and sustaining your attention. That's really all of this is about. You direct your attention to the breath. You try to sustain it as long as you can. When something else happens and you recognize it, once again, you direct the attention to the breath and you try to sustain it as long as you can. And you just keep repeating this over and over again until after a while your mind becomes trained and your attention is much more easily directed. In this process in the beginning, you find there's a certain resistance to directing the attention. I'm tired of the breath. I don't want to go back. This is evidence that there's more than one mental process in there. And which one is wearing the hat that says I? Start off, the hat with the big letter I on it goes on the part of your mind that says, we are going to meditate and we're going to put the attention on sensations of breath, and it's going to stay there. And you do that for a little while, and then there's a different mental process that says, this is boring and tiring and uncomfortable. We're going to do something else. So now it's wearing the I hat. I don't want to do this anymore. And then this other part that no longer has the I hat says, yeah, but we said that we were going to. The bell hasn't rung yet, and everyone will look at us and we'll be embarrassed if we get up and quit right now. So we've got to recognize that in terms of this process, it's not about control. It's not about some self that has control of a mind, or even a mind that's a collection of things. It's about bringing this diverse collection of processes into a kind of uniformity, and the only thing that you really can do volitionally is generate intentions. As a matter of fact, this is a very important part of meditation, but going beyond that, for those of you who are familiar with what the Buddha taught, this is essentially what he said, that really all you are is the intentions that you generate. You are the product of your karma. And he said, when I say karma, and the word karma means action, when I say karma, I mean intention, volitional intentions. And so when you examine what he taught very clearly, you realize that he is saying, that in this being, the selfness of which is an illusion, the only fundamental process that can be directed in such a way that it leads to specific results is the generation of volitional intention. So we've kind of arrived at a real bottom line. Right here at the beginning of the meditation process, we've discovered all I can do is to create and continue to recreate and try to maintain an intention. And that intention is to direct and sustain the attention on a particular object over and over again until there's mastery of that. And then, of course, we move on. There's new intentions that follow that in the progressive development of the 10 stages. But keep this in mind. All you can do is to create the intention and then keep rousing the intention again. You have the intention to attend to the sensations of your breath. And we experience that as the directing of attention, because the mind responds to intention by carrying out the action. The same way I decide to reach for that bottle and pick it up. I mean, have you examined something like that? The intention arises to reach for this. And it's amazing. My arm does it. Do I really do that? If you have something near you, just go ahead and reach for it and see. Your participation in the process as the entity that you perceive to be in control actually ended with the release of that intention that caused your brain and your nervous system and your muscles to carry it out. If you're lucky, it happens exactly the way that you intended it to, and you have your arm and hand move the right way, and it grasps the bottle and it picks it up. Sometimes it doesn't. It goes over there and you spilled and made a mess. But all of the doing was in the generation of intention, and the same thing is true in meditating. There's the intention to pay attention to the breath, and the mind will follow the intention. So your job is just to keep that intention happening, since that's all you can do anyway. You see what I'm saying? It's all you can do anyway. Just keep that intention there. So you direct your attention and you sustain your attention. And then if for some reason the attention is no longer sustained, when through a process that you're not in control of, the awareness arises, then there is the intention that this is a good thing, that this awareness is a good thing. I want this to happen again. I want every time my mind starts to move away from the meditational object, I want this awareness to come up again. So this is your other intention. Your intention to have this kind of awareness. And then that's immediately followed by the intention to have the attention go back to the meditation object, and then the intention to sustain, to be sustained there as long as you can. So that's all it is. That's the whole process here. Your job is to generate the intention, and in this case your intentions are all about the directing and sustaining of attention. Okay? So now I'm going to introduce you to another practice in support of that, walking meditation. Now, normally when we walk, I want you to pay careful attention to my feet as much as you can. Normally when we walk, we take a step, and before one step is completed, the other foot's already rising up. Right? So I'm going to ask you to walk in a way, to train yourself to walk in a slightly different way. You need to be able to see my feet here. Okay. So I want you to train yourself to take one step at a time. You don't move your back foot until your front foot is completely placed. And then you shift the weight onto that foot, and then you take the second step. And then you shift the weight onto that foot, and then you take the next step. And you can do this very slowly, or you can do this more quickly. But I want you to practice taking one step at a time. And now, what I want you to do with your attention, which ultimately means what I want you to do with your intention. What I want you to do with your attention is, when you get ready to begin walking, direct your attention to the sole of the foot that you're going to move. And become aware of the sensations in the sole of that foot. And then sustain your attention on that until you have placed that foot. Shift your weight. Now direct your attention to the other foot. Sustain your attention on it until that step is complete. Shift your weight. Direct your attention to the other foot. Sustain your attention on that until that step is complete. Directing and sustaining your attention. One step at a time. This is a very powerful practice. In some ways it's easier than the sitting practice, but it's complementary to it. Both need to go together. Now, of course, the same thing is going to happen when you're walking as happens when you sit. other things are going to intrude into your awareness. And some of these things are going to be fairly strong for one reason or another. So here's the rules. That you want to, first of all, immediately redirect your attention away from any thought that is about the past or the future or some other place that's not right here and now. Okay? And direct your attention away from that kind of thought back to the present moment. And in most cases, that you're going to be directing that thought probably to the sensations of the sole of the foot that you're in the process of moving. But other things are going to happen. You'll be walking, and there will be a sound, and you've noticed this sitting, there's a sound, and you are palpably aware of your attention goes from here over to that sound, right? And then it comes back. But when you're walking, what I want you to do, there'll be a sound and your attention goes to it. Well, if it's trivial, then you just bring it right back. But if it has a strong draw on your attention, then what I want you to do is to deliberately just stop the walking for a moment and deliberately place your attention on that sound. And of course, the sound, it may be of the nature that it's brief and it passes away. If it's brief, when it's passed away, then go ahead and take a moment just to experience hearing, to be in that place of the sense of hearing. And then direct your attention back to the process of walking. If it's some kind of ongoing sound, as long as you feel it has a hold on your attention, continue to listen to it. Experience it. Examine it. It's your object. Put your attention, direct your attention, and sustain your attention fully on that sound. And then when you perceive that its attraction to your mind is fading, then come back to the sensations of the sole of your feet. Okay? And what you're doing here, once again, it's like we talked about before lunch, dealing with pain. It's a kind of finessing. What normally happens, an unusual sound happens and the mind immediately goes to it. This is a mind that is not fully responding to intention, because your intention is to have your attention remain on the sensations of the sole of your feet, right? So but rather than fighting against that, the same kind of finesse. If my mind's going to go to this sound, then I'm going to make my mind deliberately go to this sound. And it may very well be that if it wasn't your intention, your mind would go to it anyway. But that doesn't matter. The imprint that you're making is that whatever you're attending to is what you have intentionally directed your attention to. You see what I'm saying? Any kind of, I use sound as an example. It could be something that you see. And if something in your visual field captures your attention, stop the walking. Put your attention fully on it. Go ahead, investigate it visually until its attraction, its appeal is faded, and then go back to the walking. So that as much as possible, you're always consciously directing and sustaining your attention. You see the idea here? This is powerful training of your mind. And as we develop it further, I was talking earlier about the 4 applications of mindfulness, being mindful of the body and the sensations or the feelings as they rise and pass away in mental states and so forth. Very easy to say, not so easy to do. But this practice that we're talking about right now is the key to being able to do that. Because when you're in the world, sensations and feelings and mental states are arising and passing away very quickly. And so you need this practice of being able to go to whatever is there and arising and experiencing it clearly. Right now, if you investigate a sound, you may spend 15 seconds investigating it. But as you acquire more skill, you'll have a tremendously powerful investigation that may occupy only a fraction of a second. But you really have clearly observed what was taking place in that moment, as brief as it was. But anyway, back to the basic meditation which I want you to practice. So you're walking along slowly, one step at a time, practicing directing and sustaining your attention on the sensations in your feet. You see or hear or feel something, maybe a cool breeze or something like that, or if the sun ever comes out, it might be the sun shining on your skin or something. Anything like that you feel has the ability to draw your attention, then you deliberately, consciously direct your attention towards it. Experience it. And in most cases, just take also a moment to experience that whole sensory realm before you come back to the walking. If it's a sensation on your skin, before you come back to the walking, just settle the awareness fully into the body and just experience what's going on in your body, and then go back to the walking. Okay? Any questions about that method? This is, in terms of the speed to do that which, do it in a speed that's comfortable enough for you to be deliberate. Probably something like this, one step at a time. There's another slow walking meditation, and there's and also a kind of meditation that's where you walk much more quickly, and we'll hopefully get around to talking about those during this weekend as well. But right now, this is the walking meditation that complements the sitting practice that we're doing, developing the skills of directed and sustained attention. And the place that we're looking to come to as soon as possible is that the periods of time when you can successfully sustain your attention on the chosen object will become longer. I mean, comparing any two intervals of continuous attention, they're going to vary. One's a little longer, but on the average, overall, you'll have the experience of being able to sustain the attention for longer and longer periods of time. And the other side of this is that the periods of mind wandering will become shorter until at some point there ceases to be any mind wandering. It's a brief period of forgetting the meditation object and then a return to the meditation object without an intervening period of mind wandering. And then it's a very small step from that to where you become aware of the tendency of the mind to move away from and lose the meditation object before it happens. And at that point, then you will have continuous awareness, uninterrupted continuity of attention to the meditation object. This is basically the second, third, and fourth stages in what's outlined here. In the second stage, you have relatively short periods of attention to the meditation object. In terms of the breath, these might be, anywhere 3 to 5 breaths or 15 to 20 breaths, but rarely longer than that before you forget the meditation object. And often the interruptions are fairly long, so that once you've forgotten the meditation object, there may be a minute or 2 or 3 spent in mind wandering and absorption and various thoughts that arise before you actually come back to it. In other words, in the second stage, just to simplify it, comparatively, the periods of sustained attention are short, the periods of mind wandering are long. But at some point, and it happens fairly rapidly, you will experience a transition to where it's the opposite case. The periods of sustained attention are long, and the periods of mind wandering are either short or else there is no mind wandering at all. It's just the forgetting and then the remembering and coming back to it. And that's the third stage. Then the fourth stage is where you rarely actually forget the meditation object. that there is, even though it often slips into the periphery of your awareness and you're just barely aware, you never really lose it. And that's a wonderful magical stage. When you reach that stage, you'll feel very, very good about your practice. You'll begin to experience a lot of real understanding of the point of the practice. You'll be able to see much more clearly than you can right now what the whole value is of creating this anchor for your mind. Right? And your meditation will be more satisfying and more enjoyable. Your mind will also have significantly calmed to that point. So you will have, sometimes to a greater degree and sometimes to a lesser degree, a more of a sense of calm and peacefulness associated with your meditation. And hopefully it won't take you very long to get to that place. The key thing is no negative thoughts, no disappointment, no judgment, no expectation. Just do the simple steps of the practice and let the practice unfold by itself. The only thing that you should feel is good about one thing or another. And let me just remind you of the things that you can feel good about. Okay? That you're sitting here and you've set this time aside and you don't have to do anything else or worry about anything else right now. The whole rest of the world is not your concern until the bell rings. I mean, that's something to feel good about. And so, whenever you can, remember to feel good about that. Whenever you have the experience of being more fully present and more fully conscious, like hey, I'm really right here and I know what I'm doing. I know what my mind is doing. Feel good about that, because that's a really wonderful thing. I'm not suggesting those words will go through your mind, but that awareness will be there. Is that, hey, I'm here and I'm now, and I know what's going on. Enjoy that. Take pleasure in that. And what the rest of the process is, it's really simple. Like I use the example, it's like learning to play darts. You throw a dart at a target, and it'll land in a little tiny hole, little spot in the middle. And how do you do that? I assume everybody has learned some skill like that. And the fact is that there is no doing other than the repetition. You know what I mean? If you want to learn to throw darts, the only way you do it is you throw and you miss, and you throw and you miss, and you throw and you get a little closer, and then you have a hit, and another miss. But you keep on. And it's just a simple act of repetition. And then after a while, you start hitting the target more and more often. And this is exactly the same thing. There's nothing for you to do. You're not in charge anyway. You just keep directing and sustaining the attention as long as you can. Feel good about the awareness that you have, and direct and sustain the attention. That's all you have to do. Nothing to worry about. No stress, no responsibility, no way you can fail. You just do the process, and eventually you'll hit the target more and more often. It'll get easier and easier. And so let that happen. Okay? Any questions about the walking meditation or any of this that I've said? Yes.
My last session about meditating, your technique worked.
Could you speak up just a little bit, please?
Your technique worked,
Yeah.
but sometimes I still am very sleepy.
You became sleepy. Yes. Okay, that's a problem that once again, Peggy is somebody who has been meditating for a while, and this is a problem that comes up just about the time that you start to enjoy longer periods of sustained attention on the meditation object. Is you're going to experience dullness and drowsiness, sleepiness coming up. And so it is something that first usually makes its appearance in stage 3 of the practice, and then becomes a very noticeable part in stage 4. Once you get the uninterrupted continuity of attention, then you'll spend a lot of time struggling against dullness, dullness to the point of sleepiness. So let me just address, we'll come back to this, but let me just address a little bit some of the ways that you can deal with sleepiness, the strong dullness that arises. Okay. You have your eyes closed and you have your attention focused on the breath, and you're basically ignoring most of the stimuli that normally have the effect of energizing your mind. I mean, we're constantly bombarded by all kinds of sensory stimuli, things we see and hear and feel, and they keep our mind in a state of arousal. You close your mind, you withdraw your attention, you become quiet. When you start to become successful at that, then the energy level of your mind is going to fall. And so you might need some tricks to help bring the energy level back up again. Now, once again, in applying these antidotes to dullness, remember that all you can do is apply the antidote and apply it over and over again. That's all you need to do. And if you keep doing that, at some point, you'll come out of that dullness. And so, once again, don't get into a negative space. Don't feel bad about it. One thing I'll warn, though, is that if you haven't already experienced it, the dullness is seductive and pleasant. The pulling yourself out of dullness is unpleasant. It almost hurts. It's almost painful to pull yourself out of that pleasant dullness, that drowsiness. Okay, so you're going to have to deal with that resistance. But otherwise, once again, it's not a question of something that you are to blame for or responsible for making stop. You don't have control, but you keep applying the antidotes over and over again until the desired result happens and the energy level of the mind comes back. So, of course, I'm going to start with sort of the medium strength antidotes. Okay, if you find that you're having a lot of dullness and sleepiness coming up, then try taking a few really deep breaths. And if you can do it without disturbing other people who are meditating, exhale slowly against the resistance, like something like that. Otherwise, if you can't do it, just taking a few deep breaths will be somewhat invigorating. Another thing that you can do is to tighten up all the muscles in your body and then let them go. And do that several times in a row. And you should feel that energizes your mind. You won't have any dullness, at least for a few minutes. It may come back, and you may have to repeat the process. But they're sort of the medium strength antidotes. Okay. Another one that is very valuable to learn to do anyway is to meditate with your eyes open. Now, this is not quite as strong as the muscle tensing and relaxation and the deep breathing, because if the dullness is particularly strong already, you'll meditate with your eyes open, and then you find that you're struggling because your eyes are going to close anyway. So then revert to the more vigorous ones. But when the dullness is not quite so strong, often that's enough by itself. Just having your eyes open and the additional stimulus to your brain and mind from that will overcome the dullness. So this is a slightly weaker but still effective antidote. Then there's another one that's even less strong than that one, but if the dullness is not very strong, it can be sufficient. And that is to let go of your focus on the breathing, become aware of your whole body, become aware of all the sounds in the room, let your awareness expand to include your whole environment. Basically what you're doing here is you're just you've become very closed in, and there's very little stimulation, and that's why the energy level of your mind is falling. So now you expand your awareness again to the whole body, to sounds, to an awareness of the space you're in and your environment, and let that reinvigorate your mind for a few minutes. Now remember, you're not just quitting the meditation here. All you're doing is changing the focus. You're still directing and sustaining your attention. You've just changed the focus. But you do this until you have the feeling like you're more alert and you're more energized now, that being aware of all the bodily sensations and sounds and everything else has just allowed you to become less dull. So this is a very mild form of the antidote. The mildest antidote at all to dullness, and this is only when you catch the dullness at its earliest stage, which is hard to do. I mean, it takes a little bit of practice. So if you can't do this to start with, don't worry about it. But if you can become aware as soon as the dullness starts to encroach, where you're observing the sensations of the breath and you realize that they're losing clarity, they're losing vividness, they don't have the same intensity, then the antidote at that point is just simply to focus your attention in more closely on the subtleties of those sensations themselves. Just focus more closely on the actual awareness of the sensations of the breath itself. And if you catch it at the earliest stage, then you can reverse the dullness that simply. Most likely, though, and unless you've been meditating for a while, you're not yet going to have that level of introspective awareness that allows you to catch it that quickly. So you're going to already be at the stage of, there's the slumping and the distinct feeling of sleepiness. So you're going to want to use the stronger antidote of opening your eyes, clenching and unclenching your muscles, and taking a deep breath. Now, do that as often as necessary. It doesn't matter if you sit for an hour. It doesn't matter if you spend the whole hour. Dullness arises. You take a few deep breaths, and you reinvigorate your mind. And then 5 minutes later, the dullness comes back, and you do it again. And if you have to do this, say, every 5 or 10 minutes, that doesn't matter. You're training your mind to overcome dullness by doing this. But where you need the stronger antidotes is where, okay, you've pulled yourself out of it, you've taken a few deep breaths, and within a few seconds, you feel it sinking back into it again, like being sucked into quicksand. And that will happen sometimes. When that's the case, then you need the strongest antidote of all. What you do then is you stand up. You can try meditating for a few minutes standing up. Or you can do walking meditation. And then see if you'll feel if the dullness has lifted, and then you can go back to sitting. The strongest antidote of all is that if even with that, it's a matter of 30 seconds before the dullness comes on again, then you go to the washroom, you splash some cold water in your face, you take a few deep breaths, you clench and unclench your muscles, you make yourself wide awake, and then you come back and sit down. And, if you have to do that more than once, that's all right too. The basic thing that you're doing is you're setting the intention that you are not going to surrender to the dullness. And this is where all the power lies. That you persist in trying to undo the dullness. And this will train your mind. You will come to the place where you're no longer subject to dullness, or only very, very rarely. Maybe if you only had 2 hours sleep the night before and you're sitting at 2 in the afternoon after a big lunch, you may still have dullness. I won't guarantee that it's gone absolutely forever for under all circumstances. But one of the things that does happen in the 3rd and the 4th stages, you will have to deal with this kind of strong dullness. The 5th stage is overcoming subtle dullness once and for all. And once you've done that, you will rarely, if ever, have to deal with dullness in your meditation practice. It'll be gone for good.
Is it better to meditate on an empty stomach or on a full stomach?
Well, if you have the choice, it's better to empty stomach or an almost empty stomach. The worst time is shortly after you've had a large meal. A lot of your blood flow goes to your stomach to support digestion, and also there are certain hormones and neurotransmitters that are released in the process of digestion that actually have a soporific effect. They actually make you sleepy. And so you're struggling against the natural workings of your own body if you try to meditate on a full stomach, which doesn't mean that you should necessarily not do that sometimes. It's just that most of the time, and especially if you have the choice, it's better to meditate when, at least an hour after you've eaten. Okay?
If I may also share a technique for dullness,
Yeah.
especially for Peggy's case, I find this helpful. I've been playing with different techniques of seeing whether or not they could effectively counter the 5 hindrances, and this is a technique that I find helpful, at least for me, and that is to inhale in a special way as to inflate different parts of the lungs. So, for example, in one inhalation, you inhale in such a way as to deliberately inflate the lateral part of your lungs. And in the next inhalation, you try to inflate the rear part. You do the same with regard to the top part, the bottom part, the front part, and you allow your attention to become fascinated by the difference in the pleasant flavor involved in the different way the chest cavity is massaged. So essentially, you experience inhalation as a kind of internal massage, if you will, and it's creating pressures and tension and relaxations of different sorts of flavor. And by tending to the difference in the pleasant flavors, this will generally make the mind become fascinated and energized.
That sounds like it would be an effective method. The basic principle of what you're doing is you're stimulating the mind and raising the energy level of the mind. And so what you've described would be an effective way of doing that. And I've described several basic methods. And it's not exhaustive. If you understand the principle, what you're trying to do is raise the energy level of the mind. Then you may devise your own ways, and that's fine. The only thing that I would say is, remember, ideally you want the intervention to be as brief, I was going to say as brief as possible. Let me reword that. You want the intervention to be no longer than necessary, so that once you've got the mind re-energized again, you can go back to doing the practice as before. And the ultimate success in dealing with dullness, and this is a really important point, it's not the short-term conquering the dullness now. It's the long-term establishing the intentional process of the mind that you do not succumb to dullness. You do not entertain dullness. That when dullness arises, there is an immediate intention to counter it. This is the long-term goal. So, to a certain degree, it's actually advantageous to spend a whole hour struggling with dullness as compared to immediately intervening and succeeding and overcoming it. as paradoxical as this may seem. But do you understand what I'm saying? That there's a certain amount of time in that mental state of determination that I am not going to be overcome by the dullness, that is going to have the cumulative effect of wiping out the tendency of dullness once and for all. Okay? So your description is of something that sounds to me like it would be quite effective, and I encourage you, the rest of you, if you stumble across or if you deliberately devise something that helps you to overcome a meditation problem like dullness, use it. But always keep in mind that it's not the short-term objective of overcoming the immediate problem. It's the long-term objective of completely overcoming the problem once and for all. I mean, after all, when the mind becomes bored with the breath, and we have trouble sustaining attention on the breath, we could switch to something more interesting. But you see, that won't achieve the result. because that thing will eventually become boring too, and then you'll have to find something else more interesting. And so it's not the short term. Although we tend to think in terms of, my mind's wandering now, I have to settle my mind down, and so I don't have mind wandering anymore. It's really the long-term effect of becoming free from the problem of mind wandering, and it's the same thing with dullness. It's the long-term effect of becoming permanently free from dullness that is ultimately more important than overcoming the dullness in the immediate moment. If it were only a question of overcoming dullness in the immediate moment, I would say, at the first sign of dullness, get up and do 50 jumping jacks, and then sit down and meditate. But you want to engage with the dullness with the intention of overcoming it. That has the long-term effect.
One thing I hear what you say, but one thing I'm not quite get it is that because I noticed practice for a while, the dullness will be not an issue.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it won't experience that. But once a while, if experience that dullness, my interpretation is that it's a physical, maybe fatigue or anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I, at that time, just take maybe short a break for nap or whatever,
Yeah.
and come back to do the meditate. At that time, it's not a physical thing. Then you can concentrate. But this compare this with the you say need to fight, not a fight. Engage with faith and work with the dullness.
Mm-hmm.
So a little bit,
Yes.
could you explain?
Okay. And that's an important point I should make. If the dullness is due to fatigue, then that's a different situation. If you didn't have enough sleep, and you're dealing with dullness for that reason, you probably do better to take a nap. Or if you're exhausted for some reason, you've been engaged in some intense activity, or you've been ill recently and your energy level is low or something like that, rest may be more in order. What I'm talking about is the dullness, the falling energy level of the mind that is the direct result of the calming of the mind and the developing of focused awareness. And what you want to do is to counteract through your engagement the natural tendency of the mind, once it becomes settled and focused, to slip into dullness. You see, the reason that everybody experiences this in the third and fourth stages is it is the natural tendency of the mind, once it has become calm to a certain degree and focused to a certain degree, to slip into dullness. And so what we want to train ourselves is, okay, we've trained ourselves now to achieve the calm and the focus. Now we want to train ourselves to sustain the level of mental alertness. Okay? So, and that is what it's about. It's the dullness that arises as the natural result of your initial success in the meditation that you need to apply your training to. It's not about overcoming the dullness that's due to fatigue or illness or lack of sleep or something like that. And so that is an important distinction to make. And you're engaging with it, once again, let me be careful of my words here, it's not that you're struggling with it. To the degree that you feel yourself struggling with the dullness, try to let go of that perception. You're working with the dullness. You're training your mind. It's like, no, we're not going to go there. As much as the mind is inclined to go there, the higher intention that you hold, the higher consciousness is saying, no. We're going to, in the same way as with distraction. Just because an interesting thought comes along, doesn't mean that we're going to go to meditation and we're going to sit here and we're going to have a wonderful daydream. The same thing. Just because a desirable state of dullness arises, we're not going to succumb to it. we're going to go back to the practice. Okay? So, but that is that I'm glad you brought that up. It's an important distinction. This is not about overcoming natural physical process. It's overcoming a mental process that is actually the result of one aspect of the training, and training ourselves away from that problem as well. Yes?
I noticed it says mental or meditation object as in always one. But it's possible to split attention into at least two streams. For example, you could be processing sound as in listening to someone's conversation.
Yeah.
At the same time, could be focusing on your hands or your feet or something else. Is this something that can be practiced, or this?
This is something that can be practiced and is practiced later on. In terms of the power of mindful awareness, we want to expand and increase that, and one of the ways that we use that is by trying to achieve the same level of mindful awareness of a larger object or a larger scope as compared to just a tiny focus. Okay, so that is something that we do. Tempted to get into a digression here. One of the outcomes of in the history of Buddhism, the sutras were taken and an attempt was made to systematize the philosophical points that the Buddha had made in the time of his teaching. And that is embodied in one part of the scriptures that's called the Abhidhamma. And for several hundred years, actually for about 1,000 years or more after the passing of the Buddha, there were many schools of Buddhism that you could basically call Abhidhammist, because all of their attention was focused on these philosophical points that had been derived from the Buddha's teachings. And one of the theories that arose out of that is that experience consists of one discrete moment of consciousness at a time that arises and completely passes away before the next one arises and passes away. And as a result of this theorizing, it was said that it's impossible to be conscious of more than one thing at once. Okay? But everybody's experience is just the opposite of that, right? Yeah, we're all the time conscious of many things at once. So the theorists replied that, yes, but these moments of consciousness, they're so short that there's thousands and thousands of them happen in a fraction of a second, in a snap of a finger. There's all kinds of different numbers. Some said 64, some said 64,000. Different numbers are offered for how many moments of consciousness. But the idea here, in defense of their theory, was that these moments of consciousness are so brief that when it seems like you're hearing and seeing and feeling all at once, really you're not. It's all one at a time, but you're jumping from one thing to another. There are actually things about that theory that are useful. And they're useful just simply as a theory in understanding the process of meditative training, and I make use of them. But in terms of whether this is an ultimately accurate description, number one, nobody's been able to experience these theoretical, virtually instantaneous dharmas. And number two, so much of the actual experience we deal with involves being aware of more than one single thing at a time, that it's good not to become too attached to these theoretical ideas, because then they just become sources of confusion. The place that we come to in samatha is a place of a highly developed introspective awareness, where we're watching our mind while our mind is doing whatever it's doing. And you say, well, if we could only be conscious of one thing at a time, how is such a thing possible? Well, we don't need to answer that question. The whole idea of you can only be conscious of one thing at a time is a theoretical construct that really we don't need to be concerned with beyond its practical utility in helping us to understand certain things. Okay? The fact is, and you can illustrate this for yourself, as a matter of fact, it's one of the things that I was planning to illustrate with you in a guided meditation, and I will, is, as I said, you have a limited capacity for conscious awareness at any particular moment. And what you define as a moment, I don't care whether you call a moment 10 seconds or a second or a thousandth of a second. But the fact is that in any given interval of time, you have a limited capacity for conscious awareness. You already know this, and I want you to explore this directly in your meditation, and I will guide you in that. But when we talk about cultivating the power of mindful awareness, we're talking about increasing that. We're talking about going from a place where the flashlight is dim to start with, and when you spread the beam, it gets really dim, to a place where the flashlight is brilliantly bright, and even when you spread the beam to encompass a lot, it's still thoroughly illuminated. And exactly how we do it is by taking advantage of what is our common experience, that we are capable of being aware of more than one thing at once. So, anyway, yes, you had a...
I have a question. Go back to the drowsiness.
Yes.
Is that the problem we when I find out the drowsiness arise, with a problem to over energize?
Yes, as a matter of fact, it is. In the fourth stage of the practice, which is where this is mostly what you're dealing with, is you don't lose the awareness of the meditation object, but you have many other things going on in your mind at the same time, or you're slipping into dullness. This in the fourth stage, you're sort of, if you're not dealing with one, you're dealing with the other. And as strange as it may seem, sometimes you're dealing with both at once. A lot of things going on in your mind and dullness. But anyway, a lot of what you do in the fourth stage, it's a balancing act where if you over-energize your mind, then it becomes agitated and you start to have that monkey mind experience. But then if you calm your mind too much, you start slipping into dullness. And so you, in the fourth stage in particular, you spend a lot of time finding the balance and fine-tuning that. You go a little bit too far one way, and then you calm the mind some more. And you go a little bit too far the other way, and you re-energize the mind. In that stage, what you actually do when you find is you will allow a certain amount of subtle dullness to be present, just to help you stabilize the attention. Okay.
I understand, but my problem is like this. Okay, I can find that the dullness at the very early stage. So but the problem is when I try to concentrate more to wake it up, it create a problem. I drop back to see when I going into a fifth or sixth stage.
Yes.
And then I aware that some dullness gonna be happen.
Yeah.
And then I focus more, and then it go out. But I drop back to a fourth stage or fifth stage.
Yes, where you start to, yes.
Yeah. That does bother me a lot because I cannot go further. I always stay stuck there.
So you feel like you're stuck in that particular
Stage, yeah.
problem of, okay, where you really are, it sounds to me like, is probably in the fifth stage, where your practice should be to gradually increase, and I mean this very gradually, increase the energy level of the mind without slipping back to the fourth stage where there's so many things going on that very often the meditation object slips into the background. So we described the fifth stage as overcoming subtle dullness. But another way, and it is in the sense that there is this tendency, as the attention becomes stable, to gradually slip into subtle dullness. And we're trying to keep that from happening. But the other thing, the other way we can look at it too, is to see if we can gradually energize the mind more and more without slipping into agitation, without slipping back into the fourth stage that you're talking about. So, at this point in time, there are some things. What you're talking about is specifically a fifth stage meditation situation. And I'll either talk to you about that personally, or maybe later on in our group discussion it may be appropriate to deal with that. But for the benefit of the rest of you, and you're looking at these 10 stages, what he's dealing with is something that is very typical of the fifth stage. That, and very often, like, we speak as, okay, I'm at the fifth stage. We're not really. We're sort of cycling between the fourth, fifth, and sixth stages. We're sort of going back and forth these and gradually moving forward. Just the same, you'll find yourself in the second, third, and fourth stages moving back and forth, and then the third, fourth, fifth, sixth stages moving back and forth. And so right now, we would say you're at the fifth stage, but what you're actually experiencing is that sometimes you get up to the sixth stage and then you're slipping back to the fourth stage, and then you're going back to and that's completely normal. You're what's happening is exactly what's supposed to happen that is characteristic of the fifth stage. But if you're feeling stuck there, then hopefully we'll have a chance later to talk about some things you can do about being stuck in the fifth stage. Okay? But what you're experiencing is absolutely what you should be at this stage of the practice. Okay? It's a problem only in the sense that you would like to be further along. Okay. Yes?
I have a second stage question.
Yes. Great.
So, you're trying to meditate for like 40 minutes, say. And after 20 minutes, you just don't want to do it anymore.
Yes, great. Mm-hmm.
So I know there's the just do it anyway method.
Yes.
But is there anything other than the just do it anyway? Is there any other tricks to help you hang with it?
You can take a period of time to find and experience the most positive aspects of your meditation. But first of all, though, let me just point out that the best thing that you can do is to recognize those thoughts and those feelings for exactly what they are. They are parts of your mind is trying to solve the problem of the current situation, and these are suggestions. So these thoughts, and the way your mind works, some things come out as thoughts like inner statements or images, that are clear in that way. But a lot of how your mind communicates with itself is through feeling, And so that feeling that arises that I'm tired of doing this is just another version of mentalese saying, well, one solution to this problem would be we just quit and do something else. And what you're basically doing is saying, no, that's not the solution. Now, what is good to do when that we can call this. I need to talk to you at some point about the hindrances, but one of the hindrances consists in a kind of resistance to practice, and another of the hindrance consists in a kind of doubt about, is what you're doing really worth doing after all? And these are closely related. And so those are the two hindrances that are arising that you're experiencing in this particular instance. And interestingly enough, the hindrance of resistance, the antidote to that is directed attention, and the hindrance to doubt is sustained attention. Or the antidote to doubt is sustained attention. So the short, simple answer is you just keep doing it. But the other thing that you can do is to take a moment to see if you can recover your motivation. That, okay, sitting here doesn't feel so bad. It's kind of nice, relax, how is my mind? Calm? or try to discover the calmness and the pleasantness. Why is it that what are the goals that I have that lead me to meditate? Just see if you can arouse in one way or another your inner sense of motivation, and that will make it much easier to just do it. I mean, it doesn't change the fact that the ultimate solution is to just do it. That directed and sustained attention is what overcomes resistance and doubt, and that's true. But we need to arouse some of that inner juice of motivation about, yes, there are good things about this. Yes, there are benefits. Yes, there are things that I wish to achieve. And, yes, it is worth doing. So, and that's a very good question. Thank you. It is really, you described it as a stage 2 problem, but actually it can actually arise at many of the different stages. Anytime a person is experiencing sort of a stuckness, that, well, I've been doing this for quite a long time. The 7th stage is a really good one for that. The 7th stage, man, I have this tremendous ability to sit here and be single-pointed for an hour, but nothing's happening, and then doubt comes in. Well, maybe this really isn't the right practice, maybe I should be doing something else. Or maybe I'm not suited to this. Or maybe the whole thing's a bunch of malarkey that they made up, and they're really, none of these wonderful things they talk about ever really do happen. And doubt takes all kinds of form. And the stronger doubt is, then there's this restlessness. It becomes harder and harder to sit. This feeling of restlessness and impatience. So it can. What you've described isn't really just a stage 2 phenomenon. It happens at different stages as well. So just keep in mind, it's just products of your mind. They see the present situation as a problem, and they're trying to come up with solutions. So, and of course, this is one solution. Of course, if you've got a headache, shooting yourself is a solution too. But
I have an experience to share this problem.
Yes.
It's also, I have found also, if you overpower, it can also become a problem. See, like if you find when you feel you don't want to do it, and then you make some motivate and to think that. But if you make it too much, then you will become another thought to affect your meditation.
You're saying that if you can start having thoughts and you get caught up in a cycle of thinking about it. Yeah. That's absolutely true. Yes.
So you got to be aware of that.
See, ultimately, what you've discovered, what you're discovering, what we all discover in the process of meditation, is the way our minds work. And we start to see these different dimensions, that you approach a particular problem in a particular way, and that just causes something else to happen. Right? And you can look at this in 2 ways. You can say, boy, this is so frustrating, I try to solve this problem, and then this other one comes up. Or you can look at it in the way of, oh, wow, I've learned something new. First I learned about that, and I was dealing with that, and now I have this new discovery and this new understanding. And that's where I want you to come from. This is all about discovery. Meditation is all about discovering the nature of your mind, the nature of reality, and it's a journey of learning, discovery, knowledge, realization, leading to awakening. It's not an arduous, painful thing that you put yourself through in order for some barely recognizable goal that you want to have. It's a process, and every stage of the journey has its own potential for wonder and delight, and that's the most effective place to be in. Not putting myself through this for sake of what I'm going to have some future time, but the wonder, the discovery of the process as it unfolds. All right, so what I want to do now is I want you to give you an hour and a half. I'm going to set a timer here for 3 half-hour intervals. First, I'll give you a 10-minute break so that you can go to the washroom and things like that. 3 half-hour intervals. And what I'm going to suggest that you do is that you sit for half an hour, and then you practice the walking meditation for a half an hour, and then you sit again for a third half hour. Okay? And do your best to remember the instructions and follow them. And as I just finished saying, just see this as an experience of discovery, of self-discovery, and be open to whatever happens. Be open to whatever experience you have, and just try to always remember to practice these very simple techniques, okay? So,
Sorry.
yes?
Maybe I should say something about the protocol of the walking meditation.
Oh,
So-
yes.
Right. You're free to pass the person in front of you if you find your own pace to be quicker than that person. But please all walk. Let's make it so that we're all walking the clockwise direction, so that people moving in the opposite direction won't bump into each other.
Yeah.
Right. So you have the option of either walking in indoor, which is downstairs, or outdoor at the area that we mentioned earlier. The gong will be struck at these two places at the designated time. So if you are outside of this area, then you run the risk of not being able to listen to the gong, not hear the gong.
Okay, thank you. Any questions about where to walk or anything like this?
So indoor is walking downstairs.
Yes, and
There's a big room downstairs.
there's a big room,
Very big one.
huge room downstairs for walking. Yeah. There's also, right next to it, there is a small room that if you want to sit someplace that's a little more secluded, of course, if everybody goes and sits in there, it won't work. But I'm expecting that most of you will do your sitting practice in here. But if somebody finds that they prefer a little more seclusion, there is a second smaller room downstairs where you could sit. Okay?
Can we turn the lights down a little bit when we do the
Yeah.
setting?
Yeah, we will.
And did you talk about eye contact?
Oh, yes. When you're doing the walking meditation, of course, try not to have any contact with anybody else, including eye contact. Look to the side or look down rather than looking, because to walk you have to have your eyes open. And if you look at somebody or you smile at somebody, you're just crashing right into their meditative space, you know. And so don't do that. Try to allow everyone to have as much privacy as is possible, given the circumstances that we're sharing a space for walking. Okay, thank you. All right. Okay, well, so go ahead and have a stretch, and then and then we'll begin sitting, walking, and sitting. And then we'll at the time that the final bell has rung, then you'll have another opportunity to go to the washroom, and you'll have been sitting and stretch. But then we'll get back together in here and we'll talk about what your experience